Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly wild, how getting a little taste of authority fundamentally rewires the human brain. We're talking about the psychology of power. And trust me, it's basically a real-life Jekyll and Hyde story playing out every single day in governments, huge corporations, and even right inside our own homes. Let's get into it.
Okay, you've probably heard Lord Acton's famous warning, right? Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, today we're skipping the history lesson and looking at the hard neuroscience behind that exact quote. We're going to explore this dark mystery of human behavior. Why do totally normal, good people suddenly become ruthless when you hand them the keys? Is it a character flaw, or is something literally shifting inside their brains?
All right, Section 1, the allure of authority, or really, why we crave control in the first place. You see, evolution actually hardwired us to want power. For our ancient ancestors, being in charge meant survival, better status, better protection. We naturally want to be the boss. But that exact drive leads us straight into what psychologists call the power paradox. It's a huge trap. Usually, people rise to the top because they're incredibly kind, they cooperate, and they actually listen to people. But the paradox is, once they actually get that power, boom, those exact same good traits can vanish completely, replaced by selfishness and a stunning loss of empathy. It's a crazy contrast to think about. The very traits that get you promoted, empathy, active listening, being a team player, are usually the first things thrown out the window the second you feel untouchable. The empathetic collaborator suddenly turns into this arrogant, disconnected ruler. Once someone feels perfectly secure at the top, they just stop listening to different opinions. Suddenly their coworkers aren't equals anymore. They're just stepping stones. The exact skills that made them popular literally erode away.
Moving right along to Section 2, your brain on power. Let's look at the literal chemical addiction to control.
So here's a pretty terrifying truth from neuroscientists. Authority physically alters your brain chemistry. Having power doesn't just change your job title or your bank account. It triggers this massive release of dopamine, the brain's reward chemical. Getting influence gives you a literal rush, and it lights up the exact same neurological pathways as a severe drug addiction. This totally explains why some leaders just stubbornly refuse to step down after decades. They aren't just clinging to a job. Their brains are chemically addicted to being in charge.
And this chemical high comes with some heavy, measurable side effects. Leaders swimming in all this dopamine experience a literal numbing to other people's emotions. As their empathy drops, they start developing this dangerous God complex, kind of feeling like the normal rules of society just don't apply to them anymore. You can see how this rush isolates them, right? They lose touch with reality, get super paranoid about betrayal, and eventually they just lock themselves in a cozy echo chamber where everyone just tells them how great they are.
Which brings us to Section 3, shocking proof of power. Let's dig into the famous Milgram and Zimbardo experiments.
Now, if you're sitting there thinking, come on, I would never act like that, well, let's talk about human obedience. Back in the 1960s, Stanley Milgram did this experiment where ordinary people were told by a guy in a lab coat to give electric shocks to a stranger. The shocks were totally fake, but the participants fully believed they were real. And the result? People willingly delivered what they thought were incredibly painful shocks, just because someone in charge calmly told them to. In fact, a staggering 65% of them went all the way to the maximum potentially lethal voltage. It's terrifying, but it shows how obedience to authority can instantly override our basic moral compass.
And if that doesn't give you the chills, check out Philip Zimbardo's 1971 Stanford prison experiment. They took regular college kids and randomly assigned them to be either guards or prisoners in a fake prison. The wildest part wasn't even the abuse itself, it was how incredibly fast it happened. In just a matter of days, totally normal students who played guards turned into highly aggressive abusers, humiliating their classmates. Meanwhile, the prisoners completely broke down emotionally. It's absolute proof that a powerful environment can corrupt pretty much anyone, almost overnight.
Let's jump to Section 4, modern power and control. We're looking at authority in the digital age.
Because today, the most dangerous power brokers aren't commanding physical armies or controlling land. They're controlling our attention. Massive tech companies and these invisible algorithms wield an unprecedented psychological influence over billions of us all at once. Social media influencers can shift global opinions overnight, and digital algorithms dictate exactly what version of reality pops up on your feed. They're figuring out what makes you angry, what makes you buy things, and who you vote for. It is a profound, subtle type of control that humanity has literally never dealt with before.
But let's bring it back to your own daily life for a second.
Think about how your behavior changes the exact second your boss walks into the room. Power dynamics are absolutely everywhere, constantly shaping our reality. Think about a really strict teacher you had, or just the dynamic between parents and kids. Even tiny amounts of authority drastically shift our confidence, our risk-taking, and our decision-making in everyday chats. How we speak, how we negotiate, it's all constantly being pulled by this invisible tug of war over who holds the power in the room.
All right, final part, Section 5, the antidote to corruption. How do we actually cure toxic authority?
So, the most crucial thing to understand is that power itself is actually neutral. It's an amplifier, not an absolute. Toxic leaders will use it as a weapon of fear to crush opposition and feed their own egos. But look at historical figures like Nelson Mandela or Mahatma Gandhi. They had the exact same level of massive influence, but they used it positively. They relied on trust, respect, and deep moral strength to unite people, rather than using fear to divide them. The power didn't corrupt them, it just gave them the tools to execute their values. To actually stay a positive leader, you have to actively build up a psychological shield. I'm talking about daily, rigorous practices of empathy, humility, and brutal self-awareness. And look, this isn't just about trying to be a nice person, it's a really difficult psychological workout. These specific traits are basically the only things capable of stopping that ego-driven arrogance that the brain naturally wants to wire into us when we're in charge. Ethical leadership is a conscious, everyday choice to stay grounded in reality.
But let's be real, individual willpower usually isn't enough on its own. We need concrete societal cures. Democracies, companies, communities, they only survive when they enforce strict systemic limits. We absolutely need robust education, a free media, and radical transparency. Because abuse thrives in the dark, right? When leaders are held strictly accountable and they know they're going to be questioned by the people they serve, they are way less likely to abuse their position. Transparency absolutely shatters that echo chamber.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to remember this. Power doesn't necessarily change who you are at your core. It simply turns up the volume on the personality and the values you already have. Which leaves us with one final, provocative question to think about regarding your own psychology. If you were handed absolute power tomorrow, who would you become?